Hello, hello, hello. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club, and I am super excited to be here. So come on in the room as we get ready for another great novel that we're going to talk about today. So as you come in the room, let us know that you're here. If you don't mind dropping in the comments where you're joining us from, and you can even do that if you're watching later. Just put replay and let us know where you're joining us from so that we'll know that you were here and you had an opportunity to hear about this outstanding book that we're going to talk about. So, if this is your first time here, as I've already mentioned, I'm the founder of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club, which started actually in April of 2020 during the pandemic. Because, as you can see, if you look behind me, I love to read, and I especially love to read books by, for, and about Black women. And I thought, what better way to share my love of reading and books with you than doing that through a book club with you all. So I'm not going to hold you because I don't believe in keeping people longer than necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our special guest for the evening. We have the multi-passionate Dr. Shirlene Obuobi, who is a Ghanaian-American physician, cartoonist, and author who grew up in Chicago, Illinois, Hot Springs, Arkansas, and the Woodlands, Texas. When she's not in the hospital, and even when she's in it, the good doctor can be found drawing comics under the moniker Shirley World MD, writing stories on her phone, and obsessing over her three cats. She currently lives in Chicago, where she's completing her cardiology fellowship. And her debut novel, On Rotation, was selected by Marie Claire magazine for the July book club pick. So congratulations on that. So without any further delay, let's welcome Shirlene to the stage.
Hi, Marcy.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
What an
So
incredible introduction.
yes, thank you so much for being here. And one thing, could you show your copy of the book? Because I think I might have left mine in the other room.
I'm
But
here
one
to
of the
defend
things I did not mention is that you drew the cover of your own book. So that's really great.
the
Because a
cover.
lot of times authors don't do that. So that's exciting.
Yeah,
And, once again, welcome. And I love having you here because you are so many things. And it's just a pleasure to have someone with all your gifts and talents here with us this evening. So,
oh, thank you.
yes.
Be
So,
here. I'm
wow.
get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, wow, like where to begin? Now, first of all, I noted, of course, I've had a chance to read the book, the whole book, and it's very good. There's so many things that I love about it. One of the things is that, of course, it's like art imitating life because there
Yeah.
are elements of your own story in it as a physician. So, for those who may not have had a chance to read the book yet, please give us tell us a little bit of what the story is about.
Yeah, for sure. So, the story is about Ghanaian-American Angela Appiah. She's turning 25. She's a third-year medical student, and up until this point in her life, she's kind of done everything she was supposed to do. She followed the path she was supposed to, and at the beginning of the book, everything starts to kind of fall apart. Right? She doesn't do well on an exam that's incredibly important for her medical career. She gets dumped by like the lawyer boyfriend that her parents want her to be with, and all the decisions that she's made up to this point, all the hard work that she's seems to be for naught. um, and then a guy enters the scene, someone that she, in her opinion, throws up a lot of red flags, someone her parents probably won't like, right? And she falls for him, but has to kind of battle a lot of her own demons and self doubt, as well as her own perspective on who and what he is, right? In order to eventually kind of find happiness in the end. So it's very much a coming of age story. It's more women's fiction with a strong romance arc, is like what I like to call it.
Right, because that's one of the things that it's the one of the blurbs said that it's kind of like romance and Grey's Anatomy put together.
Right, right, exactly.
And it really is because one of the things in telling the story that I enjoyed is that, like, when you're talking about just the lead character's process, and the lead character's name is Angie. One of the things that she's going through is taking this test and all of the different steps that she has to go through towards becoming a physician. There are things that the average person might not know that hasn't gone through that process. But I do love the fact that you educate us along the way, about the things that she's going through, whether it's the test that she's taking or, how she goes through these different rotations that she has to go through and what that process actually looks like. And of course, since this is something that you have done, you could speak to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And for me, that was pretty intentional. I say this about my comics and my art as well, right? That, I think that narratives have multiple roles, but one of those is to educate in a way. And I love this genre for that because honestly, like I'm in academic medicine, we write papers all the time, but who reads those papers? Other people in academic medicine, right? And I really love that this is a vehicle to give some insight from someone who's gone through it into what our career entails, kind of what we see.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that I also loved was being able to see what that whole process is like just in general, but also from the perspective of you being, or even the character, you and the character being Black women in the medical field. Because as we know, as patients, there are things that we deal with when we step into that space. But then to recognize that you as a physician would also deal with some of the same types of issues.
Exactly. And I do think that that's a perspective that we don't see very often in the medical field. A lot of the times, I mean, if we think about Grey's Anatomy, House, like all the shows that ER that, we all love to watch, very infrequently do we center the Black woman's experience. And so I say kind of in my dedication, the beginning of the book, that like this book is for my girls who are going through it right now, who are finding their footing in the field. It's not just for them, but in part for them, so they can see themselves reflected.
Mm-hmm. And that's just so important to see that. And then also think of Angie, of course, being a Ghanaian-American. So there's that as well. Something that you also take the time to explain to those who may not know. Because in this book club, we've read a lot of things of women who come from different cultures, because I do think that's important for us to see that we're more alike than different.
Right.
However, there are things and ways that we are different.
Right.
And just talk about that process of what a Ghanaian American or any person who's considered not native to the United States may have to deal with just in trying to find their way in life.
Right. Exactly. The immigrant experience.
Yeah. Mm. So for you, are some of the things that Angie deals with, some of the things that you dealt with as well, just in terms of your parents trying to lead you in a certain direction, or?
Kind of. So I think that I probably wanted to do medicine from a really young age, from the time I was like 6 or 7. And I tried to look into other things at some point, right? But I do think that, and my parents, it's quite funny. They're terrified that I'm artistic, terrified. Because they were worried I was going to want to do those careers. Instead, I kept having to reassure them that no, I want to do it all. I'm quite greedy. But I drew a little bit from kind of how they approach it, but more kind of from the collective experience. I would say that, of course, there are pieces of my family and my family's dynamic and Angie's family's approach to her career and her guidance, right? Like I'm an eldest daughter as well. The age gap is different from my younger siblings, but so I know a lot about those pressures, right? That come with that. And I think that a lot of us eldest daughters from immigrant families, and honestly, probably eldest daughters from Black families in general, feel that
Probably.
Yeah, exactly. That you're supposed to make it for the family, right? You're supposed to be the one. What I always say is that, we don't have the luxury of self-determination. We're supposed to survive first, right? We're supposed to survive first, thrive first, and then maybe later figure out what it is we actually want. And so Angie pushing against that in her own ways and asking herself what she wants is a big move for her, you know.
Hmm. It definitely is, just watching that. And I mean, not just in her career, but also in some of the choices that she makes in this romance. It steps outside of the box of what maybe others might think, within her family, whether it's her parents or, even her sister. Like, you're doing something a little bit different.
Right, right. And actually, it's so funny because in writing Angie, I had to toe a line. I had to very much toe a line because I knew that if I pushed a little bit too far, I would might make her unlikable or hard to relate to. Right?
Right.
She's flawed. But what I will say about her is that I wanted a lot. I wanted every layer of the story to inform the others, right? And so in when we're talking about her relationship with Ricky, who's the love interest and on rotation, I want her place as the eldest immigrant daughter to come into play with that. I want her feelings about herself as like a very dark skinned, like educated Black woman to come into that, right? I want her experiences of being fetishized in the past to come into that. And like all of that kind of layers onto how she interacts with Ricky and how she perceives him, right? Of course, like, she has her sister who's like the closest person to her, right? Like they've come up from the same family, also offering opinions that kind of echo what's in the back of her head, And so I wanted that to be present, right? I joke that my mom, who is Team Ricky, by the way, my mom is adamantly team pro my male. Oh gosh! But when she first heard, I read the book before she read it. When she first heard that Angie's love interest was a Mexican artist, she literally said, "Ooh, Angie's mom isn't gonna like that."
Right.
And so I think all of that kind of goes into play with their love story. It informs their love story and how she kind of handles that.
Right. And it definitely does. And what I like about Ricky as well is that he's a very complex character. I would say that about all of the characters, of that you get a chance to kind of see who he is and what his story is and how he becomes the man that he is as well. He's not just some guy that shows up and is, giving her drama, so to speak. There are things that are going on behind the scenes that, show the person that he is as well.
Right. And my first draft of On Rotation actually had Ricky's perspective. It was about
Oh,
60% Angie, 40% Ricky. And
mm-hmm.
I decided to take it away because knowing what he was thinking and exactly what he was going through made the tension, kind of got rid of the tension, right? Because
No,
if you know what he's thinking, what he's going through, then it makes the drama, it lessens the drama significantly, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, like you're not questioning him the way Angie's questioning him.
right.
But it was really important to me for Ricky to be complicated. I like complicated male leads. My husband actually jokes quite frequently, and he pushed me on this manuscript. He was like, more agency. He needs more agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of male friends as well, who kind of like Ricky's made up of different parts of them in a lot of ways, right? And they're incredibly good people, good men, right? Are like, I think all of them have partners who they're wonderful to, right?
Right.
But like complicated, right? That goodness came with complications, at least in the beginning.
Right.
And they have to do some growing. And I think Angie grows and Ricky also grows. And what I hope people feel when they read this is that they grow together.
Right. Yes, I could definitely see that because, some of the things that are happening in the early part of the story. And if this is your first time watching, we don't do spoilers. But some of the things that happened early in the story, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily like him early on, but then as you get deeper and into seeing some of the things that are happening, one of the things I will say that I liked about him is that by and large, he was a relationship guy. And a lot of times we don't necessarily see men who are like really relationship guys.
Right.
They're just kind of out, to have some fun, hit it and quit it. Yeah,
Right, exactly. Nah, he's looking for Bay.
yeah, but he was a relationship guy, and that was refreshing to see.
Right, right.
Yeah,
No,
especially if it's swipe left, whatever.
exactly, right. And I think that's a thing too. With the relationship, like I wanted that to be evident. I'm like, this is a relationship guy, which means like, they're both trying to avoid being hurt because they
Mm,
both fall quick, right? And they know that about themselves.
mm,
And so it was like I honestly, I'm a character writer, right? When I write, I like that's where I start. That's where I always start. I spend forever just filling in backstories and figuring out what is this character's motivations, what are their strengths, their weaknesses. Because I like the highest compliment I can get with on rotation or with any of my writing is that my characters feel real. Like when people are like, I feel like I can know them. That's what I really want. And so for Ricky, I wanted him to be exactly what you described. I wanted people to start off reading it being not so sure, and hopefully
mm.
by the end deciding that no, this is a good guy, right? Like, and rooting for them to get together.
Right. Yes, and it was, really good to see that. The other thing, and you mentioned it just slightly. The other thing I like the relationship. I mean, yes, it's romance, but you
Yeah,
also heavily talk about the friendships that
yeah,
both Ricky and Angie have.
mhm,
That those relationships are important. And people that they've known for a long time or a shorter amount of time, and just navigating those relationships and friendships as well, and the ups and downs in those friendships, especially thinking in the case of Angie, where she has this really crazy busy schedule and how
mhm.
that impacts her friendship with her best friend.
Right. I love platonic relationships and I love stories that dive into them because I think that, as a society, we don't talk about them as much. And sometimes they can be as impactful and as hurtful and as joyful as romantic ones, right?
Mhm.
And Angie's in her like early 20s, right? And that's around the time that like friendships go kind of transition, at least for me, that was what happened with me when they transitioned from being this all-consuming thing where like your friends are some of the most important people in your lives, and to sometimes taking a back seat or evolving in a lot of ways, right?
Mhm.
Especially as other romantic partners come into play, as other priorities. Sometimes you have children, like that kind of thing. Like all these things that kind of pull friends apart. And I wanted to explore that period because it can be really rough, to
Mhm.
watch those friendships evolve and change. And I wanted Angie to have to adjust to that and have to also adjust a lot of on rotations about perspective, like also adjust her own perspective so she could see where her friends were coming from and how they were dealing with their own lives while she was busy being mired in medical school.
Right, right. And then I can only imagine that being a challenge, just thinking of all of the time she has to put in. She's studying, she's on these rotations, and
Uh-huh.
sometimes a one day off a week or whatever the case may be. All of these things that is different when you're younger and you're just kind of hanging out at will, but then you add a very busy work schedule, then you add trying to navigate romantic relationships as well. Plus, she's still a daughter, she's still a sister.
Right.
It is a lot to see, but she manages to navigate all of the relationships. Sometimes good in a good way, sometimes not so much.
Yes,
I
yes,
mean, that's real
exactly.
though. That's real though.
Yeah, and I wanted it to be that. Like, I think, like, I didn't want to sacrifice some of those other relationships in favor of others because I feel like they all kind of inform the character. And yeah, I wanted to show how she doles out and prioritizes people during this incredibly busy time in her life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the things I think of as a Black woman who is trying to, excel, an educated, a smart Black woman who wants to excel, even the whole fact of relationship in and of itself sometimes can be a challenge, for us, because we feel, people may look at us and say, oh, you're smart, or how can I help you, or what can I do for you, and you're able to do these things for yourself, and a little bit of that comes up in the story as
Right.
well. But just thinking in writing Angie, or just in your experiences with people around you, do you
Mhm.
find that for women who are pursuing these higher, levels of education and career, do you see that oftentimes that is a challenge for them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about in medicine. I have a line somewhere in Honor, it's a slight spoiler, where I talk about how for men, being a physician, having this high level education, having this career that is very well respected, is a boon in the dating scene, right? For women, not
Mm-hmm.
so much, right? And so when I look at my friends and colleagues, I mean, I'm probably one of the only ones who's married. Like, you know
Oh,
what I
wow.
mean? Like, especially amongst my Black female friends and colleagues, right? Like, and in writing, in writing Angie's insecurities, like in writing Angie, I wanted her to be hyper aware of that, right? Like, to be like,
Mm-hmm.
like, a lot of these dudes are choosing women who are less educated than them, who are they're less like they're less threatened by, right? Who will be more in awe of them than they will be of her, right? And that
Right.
was something that I kind of saw play out, like in early in my dating life, saw it play out, and then I stopped seeing those dudes.
As you should have.
So, oh, sorry, I missed that.
No, I said, as you should have.
Exactly. But I absolutely, and that's part of why I wanted to have this be a significant thread in the story, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, it's got this really strong romantic streak, but her having to be on guard for all this time and having to kind of guard her heart, because she kind of knows that people or men that she's been interested in the past are turned off by these aspects of her, like, is a huge it informs a lot of what she does and a lot of her decisions.
Right, right. Because just thinking, and this is not a spoiler. The first, like you already mentioned it, the first guy that she's with at the beginning of the story is a lawyer. So, that kind of fits like the whole Huxtable thing. Oh, we got a doctor, we got a lawyer.
Exactly.
That's Black excellence, and all these wonderful things that some people believe is would make them a power couple, or whatever the case may be. But
Right.
the reality of it is sometimes maybe that guy really doesn't want that, because he does want someone who's going to focus on him, just depending on him as an individual.
Right.
He wants someone who's going to have the time and the energy to put him first. And sometimes, if you're doing what you're doing, and this is the journey to becoming a physician is much longer than the journey to being a lawyer. So, just all of the things that are involved with that. So it was
Yeah.
really good to see that, and kind of see that when Angie does make a choice, it's not based on those things, because that's not what's most important to her.
Exactly. I definitely did not want a situation where she was downplaying her career for a man.
Right, right. Oh, absolutely not. But one of the things that is, and we touched on it just a teeny bit, the fact that she is dating outside of the culture,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
of her own culture, I should say,
mhm,
and that one of the things I liked is that just showing the process that in a Nigerian or Ghanaian, I'm sorry, family, that there's certain things that you have to do to kind of properly, go towards the process of becoming married.
mhm.
And it's just interesting to see how that all played out, and her being able to share those things and have someone else embrace that and decide to do things in the proper way.
Right, right. That was one of the most fun parts about On Rotation, writing On Rotation was talking a little bit about Ghanaian culture. And I wanted her to read like a first generation immigrant, right? Like she's kind of
Mm,
in between worlds, right? Which means that she doesn't think about it all the time. Like it doesn't being Ghanaian American doesn't or being Ghanaian doesn't inform her life all the time, right? Sometimes being Black in America informs it more. Sometimes, and then sometimes her culture comes into play and informs it more, right? So I didn't want it to read like a glossary or a encyclopedia article about Ghanaian culture, but I wanted to introduce the little bits that would be relevant. And so
mhm.
you're referring to the knocking, right? It's not
Yeah.
really a spoiler, right? So I talk a little bit about traditions in Ghanaian culture and how important it is for whoever Angie is with, if they are not from the culture, to really embrace those in order to properly honor her family. Even though in some ways some of them may seem different, alien, like to
Right.
someone outside of the
Right, right. Because nowadays, I'm like, why do a lot of people think I don't need to go talk to your family? I don't need, whatever the case may be. You
culture.
just do what you're going to do, and the family might be there when it happens with all of these grandiose engagements and things like that. But it's not necessary that people are asking for permission or going through a process, kind of like a bride price or whatever the case may be takes place in other cultures that isn't necessarily part of the American culture. But I also think that's one of the things that makes a story like yours, and just the fact of being able to see that, yes, you look at us, we're Black, but there are things that are different, and there's richness in that.
Right, right. No, absolutely. And I wanted to share that experience. I think I saw that little bits of that reflected when I first read like Americana and some of these other books
Mhm.
that talk about
Mhm.
with main characters from the diaspora, right? Like, and I was like, I want us to do that a little bit of that too.
Absolutely. And you brought up something that has been on my mind, but you mentioned it when you talked about the diaspora. I
Uh,
have noticed that there are quite a few books by Black authors who are from the diaspora. And I'm just wondering, or what do you think that there might be, how do I put it? That in some ways there might be more openness to telling stories from the diaspora versus telling, strictly Black American stories?
it's hard to say. I think publishing in general, am I allowed to say this? I think that
Don't say anything too bad.
I think like there are a couple Black diaspora authors who really helped open the door, right, for us, right? Like
Mhm.
Chimamanda Adichie, like of course, and Yagyasi, who like specifically Ghanaian. And I think that I think this is a layered question, right? I think the first layer to this is that in order to be writing in the space where you can write, right, especially if you can write as your sole career, you have to most of us have to come from some level of privilege, right? Or
Right.
we have to have another job, right? Like I have another job. And I potentially could have pushed and done writing as a sole career, but it would have been very difficult, right? And if we're
Right.
talking about like American descendants of slaves, the ADOS, like kind of population, right? Like in general, we don't. I mean, like there's not a there's not a foundation of wealth to jump off of, or there's not a safety net to jump off of in case this art part doesn't work out. Right? And this is just
Right.
me postulating, right? That
Mhm.
that may be why we see more diaspora writers in the space, right? Who make it their sole career. What I will say is that I see more Black American authors in the YA space. I don't really see them as much in the adult space, but in the YA space,
No.
uh,
Mhm.
they definitely are. There's definitely like a larger group. There's a larger cohort. In general, though, there's not that many of us. Period. Right? Like, there's not
Right.
I I have a friend who's she's very mixed and identifies as part Black, and we talk about this all the time, right? That we can almost write down the number of Black authors who are coming out. When they do, we kind of snatch them up. We're like, hey,
Right,
we're like,
right,
let's discuss, let's talk about this industry together. That there's a really small percentage of us kind of out there,
right.
and I'm hoping that more of us emerge, that publishing pays more attention to all of our stories, right? That they
Right.
pay us for those stories, and that they promote those stories so that we can have enduring careers.
Right. And I would definitely agree with you on that because, as I mentioned earlier, I've been doing this for a couple of years now. And I have had a wide range on both sides, Black Americans as well as women from the diaspora. So I definitely see where it's getting better, across the board. But I can recall several years ago going when I lived in the Savannah, Georgia area, and they would have their annual book fair, a book festival. Most of the authors that were coming were from the diaspora, not necessarily Black American writers. Even though we know that they do it, both exist. But I just found that interesting to see that, and it's wonderful to see us all. Because I went from doing this once a month to twice a month, now weekly, and I'm actually
Yes.
week. So the books are definitely coming out, and a lot of Black women writers, and it's wonderful to see that so many are getting opportunities to tell stories from across the board. That was just something that I did notice, a lot of things from the diaspora.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I do think it's like we had a couple real heavy hitters, right? And so they're like, "Can you replicate that?"
Right, kind of like in the music industry. Once somebody does something and it catches on, then everybody wants to jump on the same bandwagon.
Exactly, exactly.
Because they see that it's popular. So
Exactly.
one of the things that I did want to ask you about, well, first, of course, we mentioned that you did the cover to your own book and that you are an artist as well, as Shirley World, WHIRLMD. So tell us a little bit about that part of it, because I love the fact that I was thinking about, we got the size of the brain, the analytical, the creative, and I'm like, you're all of the above. Talk a little bit about that part of your journey in terms of your creativity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have been drawing for as long as I can remember. I've been writing for as long as I can remember as well. And I feel like comics are the marriage of those two. It's and I love comics, right? They're very succinct. They're information dense, right? Because you have the visual side of things that informs what's going on, provides context, and then you sharpen that context with words, right? Because people, if they just see an image, will make their own conclusions, but you help guide them when you add the words to it. Huge fan of comics for that reason. And I first started my comic platform in order to process my medical school experience and my medical training experience. So I started in my third year of medical school, which is the same year that Angie's in. And I was pushed to share my comics by a friend who was like, other people need to see this. And so that's how I ended up sharing on my Shirley World MD platform. I think that they have very much informed my writing over time as well, because for a couple reasons. I mean, you'll see, for those of you who read on rotation, I use what I know about the art world to inform Ricky's career, right? But I also use that time to learn how to kind of process and express myself in a lot more in fewer words and more succinct fashion. So I do think that drawing comics and drawing has made me a better writer as well. The cover of my book, it's quite a funny story because if you ask my agent, I told her I didn't want a cartoon cover and I absolutely didn't want to draw it, right? Because I was so scared of drawing something that I would look back on years later and despise. I was like, oh gosh, I cannot draw my debut's cover. But kind of as we went through different rounds of potential covers, we landed on something that was fairly similar to this concept. And I just felt like I had to do it. I was like, you know what? I feel like I know what I want this to look like at this point. And so I asked whether they would let me draw it, and they let me. So here we are.
And that's great because what a lot of people don't realize is that, in a lot of instances, you really don't have, the say over what the cover of the book looks like. A lot of people don't realize that they're not familiar with, the publishing industry that, or like say in a case of a children's book,
Right.
the author isn't necessarily choosing the illustrator. So it really
Right.
does have to be a thing where you work in tandem, and many times it's a team. So I think it's great that you were able to do both, the wonderful words inside of the pages, and then of course the cover. And just back to what you were saying about doing the comics, I can see that because if any of you have ever read comics in your life, it's definitely a thing of creating characters and all of that, and the characters having dialogue and dialoguing with one another. So I can see how that would help you, to be a better writer and to be able to say, okay, and this little bubble right here, this little
Right.
bubble, you
Right.
you have to say things
Rewind.
and get right, exactly. You don't have a lot of space to get a lot of words and content out. So I think that's awesome in and of itself as well. Now, of course, we talked about some of the things that you would deal with as a physician, a Black physician. Also, of course, we know, and this is touched on in the book as well, that there are things that you or the character deals with their patients, and seeing how patients are being treated a certain way. A Black patient is going to be maybe treated differently than what a non-Black patient would be. How important did you feel that was to include in this story?
I thought it was incredibly important and necessary, right? I think that a lot of Black people who are drawn to medicine go into it for the reasons that Angie went into it. We've all kind of had experiences early where we either personally, right, like have within our own families, right, or while training, right, where we saw these things play out. I think that a lot of people who pick up my book because it's compared to Grey's Anatomy may be expecting Angie to be going into diagnostics, right? But for me, I have found that while the diagnostic aspect of medicine is exciting, the parts that really keep me in the profession, right, are the human parts, right? And addressing things like healthcare disparities and inequities, right? Because really, every now and then we get a diagnostic mystery, and sure, it's intellectually stimulating, terrifying for the patient a lot of times, right? But the day-to-day life doesn't involve those cases, right? Most people have other diseases that we are unable to manage due to bias in healthcare, due to bias in the way American society is set up, sets up a
Mhm.
lot of people to fail and have a lot of difficulty to take care of themselves. Bias within medicine itself, right? That medicine has a lot of sins, and especially in America, you know, American healthcare has committed and continues to commit a lot of evil against Black people, right? And
Mm.
against our Black patients. I mean, but Black and female maternal mortality is 3 to 4 times higher than white female maternal mortality in
Mhm.
this country.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's part of why, not to go off topic, right? Like this recent Supreme Court ruling for Roe v. Wade is especially just chilling. I'm a cardiology fellow, as you already kind of noted, which means that I often see conditions when I'm talking about pregnant women and pregnancy. I often see conditions where pregnancy, which is a very huge causes a very huge burden on the heart, right? Like just not to
Mm.
get dirty here, but like your blood volume when you're pregnant increases by like 100%, right? Your blood, your organs squish upwards, and so for people who have certain conditions, things like pulmonary hypertension or pericardium cardiomyopathy, a pregnancy can and does kill people. And
Mm.
conditions are much more likely to be like they're we see them more in Black women, right?
Mhm.
I have seen Black women in their 30s die before my eyes from these things, you know? And
Mm.
so I needed that piece to be in there. I find it more compelling, right? I think that some people may walk in expecting the diagnostic part, and I wanted to turn that on its head a little bit and be like, no, 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 no. The diagnostic part, it's fun, it's sexy in the TV shows, like, you know, like that's cool. But let's talk
Mhm.
about, like, how do we talk to Black patients? How do we listen to them? You know, how do we take their pain seriously? Like all of these things, I wanted to actually address them. So I hope I was able to do that in a fashion that impacts people, or at least causes them to think about this when they read this book.
Oh, absolutely. It meant a lot to me, as a reader to see that. And, the fact that, number one, your book is different from other books that I've seen. I mean, just on its head, that's true. But the fact that, in a story which could have been a lot of fluff,
Mhm.
you know, with it's just about the romance and getting the guy and will she, won't she, that, type of thing. I love the fact that you did include, some things that are more real and that, are reflective of what we're dealing with, as I said, from the perspective of being the physician as well as being the person on the other side. And you already mentioned the things that we're dealing with now with the Supreme Court decision. It's just a lot of things that impact us and impact us in different ways. And just to have an understanding of it and, see that in a book, I just think that that's really powerful. And I appreciate you for
Thank
doing that, because
thank
I know, like mentioning the Marie Claire, there are going to be other people that read it who may not be aware of certain things.
I
And so this
know.
helps, to cause them to think and maybe learn something and, pursue things in a different way as well, to play a more active role in figuring out ways that we can make things better. So an outstanding thing.
Thank you. No, I agree. I really hope that maybe I don't necessarily think I'll change minds about it, but I hope they think about it, you know,
Right.
and think
Right. Just to think.
especially in the field. Yeah, just think about it. Plant a seed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Planting seeds. That is for sure. So, of course, your book has been out. Tomorrow, it'll be a week.
Uh-huh.
so,
Imagine.
so what? Right, it's on not even a week old, so a brand new baby. So, what
Uh-huh.
types of things are you going to be doing and continue promotion of the book? Do you have some like major events planned? Of course, we know the book club for next month, but beyond that, what kinds of things do you have planned?
Oh, I have things that are secrets. Um,
Oh,
oh, so I'm gonna announce it on July 3rd. The big
okay,
secret,
sounds good.
the big secret, and then I'm doing a few more podcasts. I'm not going on tour, so I will be doing mostly kind of virtual things. But I'll be posting about them on my platform on my Twitter if people are interested in hearing more.
Sounds good. Now, just a thing about writing. Of course, you have a very busy schedule.
Mhm.
So, how do you actually fit time in writing besides, like if you have some downtime while you're at the hospital? When you're not working per se, how do you fit your time to write into your busy schedule?
You know, I have to prioritize it. What I tell people a lot of times is that I write for my own wellness, for my own self-expression, to process things, and so it really truly brings me joy, and so it's something that I do very naturally. But it also means that I find ways to double up on things, right? So I write a lot of On Rotation was written on the go. Like I
Mhm.
wrote a lot of in the halls.
Wow.
My hospital halls in residency, and it means that every now and then, if I got like a good day off, I would dedicate that day to like I'm writing, right? It
Mhm.
require a very careful balance, right? Because like Angie, I am also a daughter. I'm a wife. I'm like a fellow still. You know, I have a lot of other roles. I'm a big sister, and I'm a friend, right? So I have to respect and give love and nurture to those relationships as well. And so really, I've had to be fairly intentional about finding balance. But it's been not as hard as it sounds. It's not been as hard as it sounds.
All right. And speaking of being intentional, my mom always says that's one of my favorite words. It is. I'm trying to be intentional. So, what things do you do with intention in terms of your self care?
So I think Black women should get a Black woman therapist. That was the best thing I did for myself this year. Right? Like, the best thing I did for myself in the last year. So if you look at the back of my book, I literally acknowledge my therapist. She can't say who she is, right? But I said who she is.
Right.
Because I found her very necessary for helping keep my head on my shoulders. Um, I also take it's little things, you know. I draw while I watch movies with my friends and family and my husband. I take time to take walks when the days are nice. I get bubble baths. Like, you know, I take bubble baths. I find little pieces ways of getting self care. I talk to my friends sometimes for hours on end, and sometimes those talks become writing sessions because as I like to say, my friends who aren't writers are my writing buddies. And
Mhm.
so I just am, as you said, I carve those times out, you know, to actually incorporate those little things. They're little things. They take an hour here or there, you know, but they help a lot. They help a lot.
Well, that's good to hear. And you all heard it from the good doctor. So, but that's just something that's so important, especially when you think of the fact that, as I mentioned early on, you're multi-passionate. And
Mhm.
sometimes, the person, because I can say the same about myself, I do have a day job, I read a lot, actually these paintings and things you see behind me, those are actually mine,
I was going
so.
I was like, did you paint those paintings? When you said, "Oh, behind,"
Yes.
they're gorgeous.
Thank you, thank you. But it's like, when you have a lot of things going on, sometimes you can neglect taking care of yourself. So, it's just important that we do that, and it's okay. And the other part of it is it's okay to be multi-passionate because, as you mentioned earlier on, sometimes the person may say, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that or stick to one thing or whatever the case may be, but you don't necessarily have to do that. So, right.
Right.
And you have proven that.
So, like, we shouldn't squish any of our other dimensions to make room for others. So,
Right, right, exactly. So, well, I'm going to get ready to wrap things up. Is there anything in particular that I didn't ask you that you want the audience to know about on rotation at this time?
I don't know. You were pretty thorough.
I do my best. I do my best. So, well, I do want to thank you again for coming to see us and being here with us. Of course, this video will be up for those. If there's someone you think would be interested in the story, please go ahead and share it out. You can watch it later, rewatch it if you missed a few minutes, whatever the case may be, because this is an outstanding book. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to talk with Dr. Shirlene, this evening. Oh,
Surely.
mess it up. And Obuobi. I got it
There
right.
we go. That's perfect. Perfect.
Yes, it's important to say people's names properly. So I thank you again for your time. Congratulations on all your success. We're looking forward to seeing what else you have coming up. Well, one last quick question. Are there any other books in the works? I know that you are in promotion mode, but I know a lot of times authors are already on to the next by the time they start promoting their books.
Yes. I actually got more information about number two today. So
Okay.
I don't know whether I can tell details. You know, publishing is full of secrets, so I don't know whether I can tell anything details about it until our announcement. But there is a
Right.
book two. Um,
Okay.
also it's quite different, but I think that I'm hoping that people are going to enjoy it. It's also kind of in the rom-com women's fiction area.
Well, that's good to know. And we have a comment from that Norm, my favorite multi-passionate doctor. Congratulations on the book, and cheers to more.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
So, yes, once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful conversation. Please tell everyone about On Rotation. It's a wonderful book that I'm sure that you will enjoy for the learning about the Ghanaian American culture, learning about medicine, and finding out about this love relationship. What happens in this romantic piece of the book. So if you could hold on for me for 1 second, I'm going to let everybody else go. Just to let you know, I won't be here next week because, of course, next Monday is the holiday, the 4th of July, for those who celebrate it. But in 2 weeks, I'll be back with our next book, which is it's slow popping up. Good Morning Love by Ashley Coleman. So we'll be back in 2 weeks on 7-Eleven to talk about that book. And y'all are gonna be amazed because I got a lot coming. So pretty much every week, with the exception of maybe a holiday, I have got people booked all the way to December. so, so yes, there are going to be a lot of wonderful authors. So please, if you are a lover of books, please continue to follow and stay tuned to what's ahead. And so I appreciate you for your time and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. You all take care. All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.